Somehow the situation in Palestine got even worse after the horrors of this weekend, with Israel launching airstrikes on the Gaza Strip that killed at least 20 Palestinians, including 9 children. Rights activists and journalists on Monday called out some members of the media for covering the latest developments with language that misrepresents the power dynamics of the region. So we are gonna get to that language, but we're starting off with the facts because that power dynamic is going to become very clear. I mean, more than 20 people. I'm reading 26, although it might be days until we know for sure, have been killed as a result of those most recent airstrikes. And this is coming after their forces for the last few days injured hundreds of Palestinians with rubber bullets, stun grenades, and tear gas at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, Hamas fired rockets into Jerusalem. And so this is kind of a language dynamic. It's a media dynamic that I want to talk about and I've talked about this multiple times on the show, is you will always see numbers compared in a very particular way. It's always gonna end up being how many Palestinians were killed versus how many rockets were fired. It's lives on the one side, it's ammunition used on the other side, always. Now, of course, a single rocket being fired is completely unacceptable, particularly when the intent is to kill Israeli civilians. But we can also understand the context that they basically never do. Now, there are reports of, I believe, one of those rockets injuring an Israeli civilian, which is, again, completely unacceptable and entirely counterproductive because we all know what the result of that is going to be. But we can also acknowledge that when there's a back and forth, a clash, it results in ammunition being fired, and Palestinians being killed, not people being killed on both sides. And they use the bigger number of the ammunition to make things seem equal in a way that they very much are not, morally, strategically, tactically, and all of that. Anyway, we've got a lot more of this, but I want to give you a chance, Dan, to weigh in on how things have escalated over the past few days.
Now, John, before I even start to weigh in, I just want to appreciate you for contextualizing this for the audience in the way that you did. Because yeah, for too often, for most of my life paying attention to politics, it hasn't been contextualized as an imbalanced power dynamic, which this definitely has become, unfortunately. It's a tougher thing for people to come to for a lot of various different reasons, but that has to be contextualized as a power dynamic. The other thing is that with these world news stories, I try to make this as applicable to Americans as possible when they're watching. This is the equivalent to, and this is a pattern of that's happened in a relation to Israel and Palestine in the 21st century a lot, is that you have protests similar to the Black Lives Matter protests that happened earlier last year that happen as a result of some outrage. Usually it's Israeli forces, as they're on the edges of the occupied territories, engaging in some sort of cruel injustice. In this case, more aptly, you had someone who was literally squatting in a woman's house, basically saying that if I don't do this, someone else will, coming from the Israeli side, from a Palestinian woman who just lived there. This was her and her family's house, right? So you have protests that come out of this. The protest response is usually with increased militarized police. Those police act in really violent ways. Again, disproportionate to the protests that are even happening in response to the initial injustice. And then usually Hamas will respond with weaponry and attacks, and that's true, there's always a response. This is when usually people start the conversation, is that Hamas fired rockets into Israel, so of course Israel has to respond, getting rid of all the other context John and I just mentioned. And then what happens is that Israel uses the fact that they have the biggest, best weapons from the biggest, most powerful governments with the most money to use against this small, less power imbalance threat. So you have to understand this even before you dig into some of the injustices. And then one of the injustices we just topped on is nearly 20 children. The US does really terrible things too, but the US is paying up for a lot for Israel's military efforts to do these things as well. And so we have to understand that we do these things by proxy. And it's really unfortunate for people who give a damn about human rights.
Yeah, whether directly or indirectly with any particular use of weapons, we're subsidizing that. And as was pointed out by Representative Tlaib yesterday, we have chosen, our government, I should say, has chosen, because what American citizen would choose, but our government has chosen to make that funding not contingent on literally anything having to do with anything, including human rights. So yeah, bear that in mind. Oh, and also bear this in mind. So we've been through basically this exact situation, countless times between Israel and Palestine. So Palestinians like throw a rock or something, and then there's devastating violence against them. And so then Hamas shoots rockets. And they are technically rockets, but the media loves to use the term rocket because it makes you think of missiles, and clearly that's not what they are. Because again, no, any use of it is unacceptable. They are not devastating Israeli neighborhoods or anything with this, so just bear that in mind. It conjures an image that is not true to life, really fast. And then there's the airstrikes. So I just want you to bear in mind one thing, and whether this influences you politically or just your moral evaluation of what's going on. Those 20 Palestinians plus that were killed, the 9 kids that were killed, when that set of airstrikes was authorized, there is not a single person involved in that process who thought the people who would end up being killed were the ones who fired the rockets. Nobody thought that. The person pressing the button didn't think that. The person authorizing the airstrikes didn't think that. No one in the Israeli government that would be involved in any of this strategically thinks that. It was just, you shot rockets, we're going to kill some people. They're definitely gonna be civilians. They're probably gonna be kids. None of them will have been involved in the firing of these rockets, but they have to die because it's convenient to send a message, I guess. Sorry, Dan, what were you gonna say?
No, I'm glad I let you continue. I was just gonna say that, like, yeah, it's important to acknowledge that there were like casualties, and sometimes there are casualties when Hamas responds. But remember, Hamas does these responses. But again, it's about the imbalanced power dynamic. All right, just as when we're upset in the United States when the cops like shoot or kill people who are unarmed or people who are children, it's like that's an imbalanced power dynamic for the situation. Okay, and to take that to a hyper militarized level where your neighborhood is literally occupied territory and has been, and people are just moving in. There are these like awful images that are just like searing into my mind of like extremists, admittedly in Israel, the extremists on the right who were protesting or like celebrating as a mosque was burning right near one of the occupied territories. And it's just like, I can't imagine like being tolerant of like all religions and all people as they practice them peacefully, celebrating that kind of thing. I know that's the exception rather than the rule, but I think it's also important for like progressives and like the in Israel to like speak up against this as well, very forcefully, just as progressives spoke up against the Trump administration when like the MAGA insane people were like protesting and doing these insane things as well.
Totally. Yeah, and by the way, there are always individuals and organizations in Israel who will speak out against these human rights abuses, and generally they are treated the same way international critics of the particular actions of the Israeli military or government are treated. Any policy-based or ideological critiques are immediately pitched as anti-Semitic, as if the particular political choices of one particular government represents something fundamental to Judaism, which it definitely does not.
For more political news, breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.